Hi, everyone. Welcome to Waste 360's Nothing Wasted podcast. On every episode, we invite the most interesting people in waste, recycling, and organics to sit down with us and chat candidly about their thoughts, their work, this unique industry, and so much more. So thanks for listening and enjoy this episode. Hi, everyone. This week, we are bringing you our most popular session from Waste Expo Together Online. Give a listen to Ron Mittelstaedt, chairman of Waste Connections. He shares so much good information and knowledge from his 3 decades of being in the industry. He talks about servant leadership, the election, M&A. There's just so much you can learn from him. So please give a listen, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Darrell Smith, and I am the president and CEO of the National Waste and Recycling Association. And each year we try to do a CEO interview on stage at Waste Expo, and this is our version of that this year. And it's actually one of my favorite times of year is to, really talk to one of the leaders of our industry. And, we'll talk about company issues and things of that nature, but what I really like the interview to focus on is more of the leadership philosophies and the who the person actually is that we're speaking to, so that you know these names very well, but learning a little bit more about who they are and how they got to where they are is very helpful, I think, especially for a lot of young people coming into the industry to really understand the leaders in our industry and what they're all about. So with that, as you can see, I'm joined by a face that's very recognizable in the industry, Ron Mittelstaedt, the executive chairman of Waste Connections. And good morning, Ron, and how are you doing?
Good morning, Darrell. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you taking the time as well. And I'm just going to, everybody knows you, but I'm going to go ahead and read your bio just to remind everybody of your career. Ron Mittelstaedt has been executive chairman of Waste Connections since July of 2019. From the company's formation in 1997 to that date, he served as chief executive officer of Waste Connections. Mr. Mittelstaedt has served as a director of Waste Connections since its formation and was elected chairman in January of 1998. Mr. Mittelstaedt also served as president of Waste Connections from its formation through August 2004. Mr. Mittelstaedt has more than 30 years of experience in the solid waste industry. Ron serves as director of SkyWest Incorporated as well, and he holds a BA degree in business economics with a finance emphasis from the University of California, Santa Barbara, no less. Santa Barbara is a beautiful place. I was running there not too long ago. It's gorgeous. Yeah. So, Ron, just to get started and just to let people know a little bit more about you, what can you tell us about, your life outside of the office, your family, your passions, what kind of, and surprise us if you can with some of your interesting hobbies. So.
Well, let's see. I've been married to my wife, Darren, for a little over 30 years. We just celebrated our 30th anniversary 2 weeks ago. We have 3 adult children, 2 sons and a daughter. We recently, after stepping down from the CEO role at Waste Connections, I bought a small winery and vineyard in the foothills of the Sierra Tahoe region near Sacramento, where we live. And my sons and I now run that on a day-to-day basis. So that has become a very large hobby for us. But we love offshore boating. We love sport fishing, snow skiing, golfing, a lot of outdoor activities. And anytime we can spend together as a family, which is getting harder to achieve as the kids get into their late 20s, is time we cherish.
Well, that's great. And you didn't plug the name of the vineyard, but I'm going to ask you to if you will.
The name of the vineyard is Too Good Estates Winery, and Too Good is not a play on words. It was actually the last name of the original developer and founder of the winery, Paul Too Good.
All right. Well, I hope I sent the stocks rising by making that mention here. So, hey, so I'd like to learn a little bit about how you got into the industry. If you can think back, 30 years ago, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have the internet, really. I remember I was walking around with a pager, had to find the nearest telephone all the time, payphone all the time. Things were quite different in a lot of ways. Talk to us a little bit about your early days in the industry, how you got in, and what are some of the things that, looking back to the way things are now that have surprised you over the course of that time?
Sure. Well, I started in the industry almost, I guess, a little over 32 years ago now, back in late 87, early 88. And as you said, things were very, very different. The technological advancements that have happened since then were staggering. I remember when I was first with BFI, which is where I started, I was recruited by BFI at the time, the second largest company in the world, back in the late 80s. I had been working in San Francisco in the transportation industry, and I was recruited by them into the sales side of the business, the sales management side of the business for BFI in Sacramento, California, which ironically is where I am today, and ended up making myself home for many years. Back then I carried a bag phone. It weighed probably 4 or 5 pounds. It was about the size of a small briefcase, and it was $3 a minute to make a call. So BFI would allot us 100 minutes a month. So
Yeah.
as you can imagine, now we call for unlimited for $29 a month. So technology has had a huge impact in the business. Back in the 80s, late 80s, I mean, number one, there were so many public companies. There were 16 or 17 public companies as compared today with really, 4 or so, and 3 until recently with GFL going public. Landfills were more of an old dump site where things were just buried and covered. And today they are really engineering marvels where, people are spending $500,000 plus an acre to construct very sophisticated airspace and monitoring situations. Waste collection was mostly manual back then. You had rear loaders, both commercially and residentially. You had 2 or 3 men hanging off the back of a truck. Today we fast forward and we're mostly one-man vehicles, whether it's an automated side loader or a front loader for commercial. People had their own garbage cans and they were in the back. They were aluminum or galvanized steel cans, and our drivers fought the dogs to get the containers and bring them to the curb and dump them into a barrel and then dump those into a rear loader down the street. And today, many places we have a poly cart at the curb that an automated arm picks up with a driver in an air-conditioned cab using a joystick. So technology has changed the business dramatically over the last 30 plus years. It's led to tremendous consolidation because the capital cost of being in this business is so much higher today than it was 30 years ago, particularly when you look at the landfill side of the business. But again, an automated truck today going for, approaching $400,000 in some parts of the country. And, back in the late 80s, a new vehicle was in the $80,000 range. So we've seen a 5-fold increase in the cost of equipment, and we've seen nearly a 20-fold increase in the cost of developing and owning a landfill. So that has led to tremendous consolidation of public companies. It's led to tremendous consolidation of private companies. The business is fundamentally is the same. It's collecting and burying waste and recyclables, or processing recyclables, not burying them, obviously. But it is much more of a white collar business than just a pure blue collar frontline business. It was a very wild days, sort of the old Wild West back in the 80s and 90s. Growth for growth's sake, and everyone wanted to be everywhere. And today it is the companies are much more strategic about what they're doing and where they are and why they're there, looking at it on a market basis as a business rather than just a business to grab market share.
Yeah, well, you make some excellent points, and I remember those expensive phone calls. You had to speak quickly. So, but that's an excellent synopsis of, how the industry has transformed and just become and I think we're getting better. I think things are, there's certainly, the capital costs are increasing, like you say. But I think overall, we're certainly as an industry have a lot to be proud of over that period of time. And just hearing you speak about it, it kind of reminds you about the way things used to be and how far that we've come. So thank you for that. I want to change to a little bit more of a serious topic. Now we are, first part of September when we're recording this for showing a couple weeks later, and we're right in the middle still of the COVID crisis. And, I don't want to, spend forever talking about COVID, but, we have to speak, a little bit about it. And, one of the things that has touched me a great deal, I've been back in the industry now for 3 years, and this has been the most intensive lobbying campaign that I've ever had to orchestrate, during COVID. We had tons of things going on a daily basis, especially in March when it all kicked off. But during all of that crisis and during all of that activity, from time to time, I would sit back and I would think about how proud I am to be part of this industry. That we have managed to not have a major crisis within the industry during all of this. One thing the country did not need was a waste crisis during the middle of the COVID crisis. And with just a few minor hiccups, we have avoided that. And I have just, had the opportunity to be very proud. You've seen the social media posts of people thanking their local waste handlers, et cetera. Have you had this similar thoughts and opportunities to be proud of the industry during this time?
Without question, Darrell. I mean, number one, I think we within the industry, certainly our leadership within Waste Connections, we have always, viewed our frontline employees as not only essential, but, effectively almost superheroes. I mean, what they have to deal with, the hours they deal with, the conditions they deal with, the climate they deal with, the traffic they deal with, the size of and the risk of the equipment that they deal with, and doing all that within the public domain on a daily basis for 8, 10, 12 hours a day really is an incredible task, and they don't get the credit that they truly deserve. I think that COVID has highlighted from the communities and from our customers how truly essential and important the frontline sanitation workers are, and it really stood out throughout the COVID, and particularly during March and April and May, during those first months when there was such a lockdown, and people, the last thing needed to be concerned about at their home, particularly as more people were home and waste volumes were rising at homes across the country, was it going to get picked up? Was it going to get picked up on time? People were panicked about what was in their container because did it possibly carry COVID? And those fears. Never did I see our frontline employees or the industry frontline employees panic. They were there. They showed up. Absenteeism never went up at our company or any that I have heard of. And they really did sort of what they do on a day-to-day basis, but really started to get the credit that has been long overdue. I know our social media feeds were lit up with thank yous to the frontline employees, posters, pictures, presents, you name it, for the drivers on both commercial and residential routes. We have an intranet in effect that goes to everybody through a social media feed, and we would post those on a recurring basis to really highlight the extraordinary efforts of our frontline employees.
Absolutely, and if there has been a blessing in the industry, I think the country probably does appreciate us a little bit more after this crisis. If there has been one good thing that has come out of it. So, hey, I want to shift just a little bit to leadership and your philosophies around that. And I've heard you several times talk about servant leadership, the kind of the path that Waste Connections has taken in leading its people and motivating its its people. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what servant leadership is again, to remind everybody. And then also, how do you think that has been beneficial for your company during the COVID crisis?
Sure. Well, we began as a company on the journey of servant leadership as a leadership philosophy that we wanted to embrace and incentivize throughout the company almost 16 years ago now. And I say a journey because servant leadership is not a program. Programs have beginnings and ends. Servant leadership is a philosophy. It's an ideology. It's something that you have to indoctrinate into your DNA and becomes a way of life, a way of doing things. And so it takes a long time. And we're far better at it today than we were 5 years ago and 10 years ago and certainly 16 years ago, but we still got a ways to go. And at its core, servant leadership is about the leader, the manager, being responsible to those that work for them, instead of just the other way around, where people are responsible to who they report to. This is about the leader taking personal responsibility for the health and the safety and the welfare, both professionally and personally, for those that they have the opportunity to lead. It's about employees being able to hold leaders accountable, not just leaders holding employees accountable. So it's a reciprocating relationship where the higher you are in the management or the leadership totem pole of the organization, the greater the burden of leadership, the greater the burden of responsibility of caring for those that you have the opportunity to lead. So it's really taking the traditional management pyramid and sort of inverting it on its head, if you will. And that's not for everyone. And not every leader wants to do that. And that's okay. Then that leader is not a fit for Waste Connections ultimately. Because for 4 years, for 5 years, it was sort of optional within our organization. And then at the end of 4 or 5 years, as we saw the successes it brought to the organization, we really made it not optional. And so it's a cultural pillar of our company, and something that sort of binds the organization together from a cultural standpoint. Has it stood out in COVID? Absolutely, it stood out in COVID. I would have expected it to, and it has. I mean, the reality is that our frontline employees, and all our employees, not just our frontline employees, but look, they're worried about what's going on at their house while they're trying to perform their job. They're worried about what's going on with their family, with their children, and especially during COVID, when they may not be in school, when they may be homeschooled, when their significant other may be at home and away from their job to help care for children, or the children are left with somebody else. So COVID has increased the burdens on employees, particularly frontline employees. It hasn't decreased them, it's increased them. So that's where servant leadership really stands out, because it's on the burden of their leader to help them figure out how to balance the work-life, home life balance, and help them be successful both at work and at home. So it really stands out in a period of crises like COVID. And I think it puts more work, more load on our leaders, but that's the role of a leader.
Very good. Yeah, and I have a few things that I try to make myself do. One is to give people, I like when somebody works for me, I like their resume to look better after they've worked for me than before. So I try to give people, even though it pains me sometimes, I like to give people good titles. I like to give them good responsibilities. And I'm like, I'll give them a title, and I'm like, this is kind of risky, because you improve somebody's resume, then they might leave. But it's always worked for me, and it's never really backfired. So that's one thing that I do that I think kind of falls in that category. But I appreciate that. I appreciate the philosophy, and I've heard you speak about it several times, and it's really good to hear that kind of attitude. And it does help people down the road. And speaking of that, everybody has leaders in their life that have helped their career. I had a guy that really started my whole career that died recently, and when I think back, to my whole career. He really, I owe him just about everything for it. So, who in your life was a great leader, and who do you owe your career to?
Well, there's several. I can't point to just one. I have people within the waste industry that I'd point to, and I will, and people outside the industry. I mean, first off, I'd say my father. My father was an executive with General Motors for 40 plus years, and really, I saw through him the value of hard work, the value of personal responsibility, the value of taking care of people. A lot of the values that I have as an individual, I came from watching him over the years as I grew up, and so I'd first point to him. Within the industry, I'd point to a few different people. I mean, my first regional vice president at Browning Ferris Industries was a gentleman named Chuck Wilcox. I still know Chuck well, have the highest regard for Chuck. He was an extremely good operator. He was extremely sharp financially, taught me the business both on an operating and a financial standpoint, was passionate, tremendous energy. And, I talked to him probably 3 weeks ago, and he sounds today like he did 32 years ago. And so I learned a lot from him. I learned a lot from Rod Proto. Rod Proto on the deal side of the business. When I was at Santa Fe as a regional VP, and he was our president. Rod really taught me the deal side of the business, the M&A side of the business, the market strategy side of the business, and the landfill side of the business. So I learned a lot from Rod as well. Within our own organization, a gentleman that I've had the privilege of founding the company with, and have been a friend with for 32 years, the current COO of Waste Connections, Darrell Chambliss. Darrell is a tremendous leader. He works harder than probably anyone I know. He never says never. He's always there for people. And the workload that he can process and carry is just beyond description. And I've had the pleasure of being with Darrell since before the inception of Waste Connections, and he was one of our founders with me. Outside of the business, probably two individuals. Ken Blanchard. Ken Blanchard really introduced me and mentored me and taught me servant leadership and taught me how to implement it within the organization over the years. And he has spoke to our organization several times over the years. And then John Wooden, the legendary UCLA basketball coach. I got to know John through Ken Blanchard, and John spoke to us 2 or 3 times as well. And his life lessons and lessons as a coach were really about servant leadership, to be very honest. And I got to know him, decently well. Would talk to him from time to time, and just having 10 minutes with him on the phone or face to face was an invaluable and life impacting experience. So those would be who impacted my career.
That's excellent, and I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that put you on their list. So I'm 100% confident of that. So hey, there've been some other things going on during COVID. A lot of calls for change within the country relative to diversity and that kind of thing. And in the industry, we've been having several initiatives such as bringing more females into the industry, bringing more minorities into the industry. And, we've had a lot of programs going on already. I mentioned the Women's Council at NWRA, for instance. What is Waste Connections doing to respond to what's going on? Have you changed anything? Have you, looked at new programs or new thoughts in that regard relative to diversity in the industry?
Well, certainly we have. Number one, we came out we came out. I'm trying to think whether it was 18 months ago or so, and we said that we had targeted getting to a 30% threshold for our board of minority and women candidates. We have increased that to 25%, so we're almost there, almost to that initial threshold at least, from where we had been at 0. So that was something that we have done. And, the reality is that in our mind, inclusion and diversity are not programs. When they become programs, again, they have starts and stops. And inclusion and diversity need to sort of become a fabric within the organization. They need to become a thread within the fabric of the organization. They need to be part of the DNA of the organization, part of the DNA of the culture, and how you do things. And so we believe that servant leadership has helped us be more inclusive for a number of years, has helped us be more diverse for a number of years. We're all about trying to hire the most qualified person, irrespective of age, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation. That's all secondary and doesn't come through in the process if it's done right. We're trying to hire the most qualified person. But the other reality is, if you're not intentional about improving diversity and improving inclusion, it'll be slower to get there. It'll still get there, but it'll be slower to get there. So I think we are attempting to be more intentional. We're not setting specific targets for any specific ethnicity or gender, but because what we think that does is that causes you to, we actually think that's counterproductive to the individuals and to the rest of our team members. We want to make sure, as I said, we're hiring the most qualified and promoting the most qualified candidate. But, Worthing Jackman, our CEO, and our executive team has convened sort of a summit of all of our top field leadership, and is asking at that summit that we take a very hard look at where do we have sort of innate biases within the organization, within our policies, within our processes, within our hiring, within our promotion, within allocations of resources, within our training. Where do we have innate biases, if they exist, and how do we intentionally knock down those innate biases so that inclusion and diversity gets accelerated, if you will? Yes, it is something that's extremely important. We don't believe it can be a program, but we do believe you need to be intentional about improving it.
Yeah, I really like that concept of intentionality. When you're intentional about something, you'll find opportunities that you didn't think were there, and I really like that. So if we can move to the industry as a whole for a minute, and I wonder if you can look in your crystal ball, and please look past COVID, which we will get to very soon, I hope. What are some things we can expect in the industry in the coming years, and what are some things we can expect at Waste Connections, et cetera, as well, and things like M&A activity and the like. What are you seeing down the road?
Well, first off, let me maybe answer the second part of your question, M&A and the industry and Waste Connections. I don't mean to oversimplify this, but I think it really depends on what happens at the upcoming election. Mm-hmm. And not just at the presidential level, but of course at the Senate and the House level. The reality is we projected 4 years ago that if President Trump was elected, that there would be an acceleration of M&A across the board, both at the top of the industry and throughout the industry. And it's been literally a record 4 years of M&A, not just in our sector, but in many sectors. And that's due to tax change. It's due to interest rates. It's due to the GDP that the economy had pre-COVID. It's due to the expensing of capital. There is a host of things that have undergirded an M&A expansion for the industry and for Waste Connections. The reality is that if President Trump is reelected, and depending on what happens in the House and Senate, and a current sort of regulation and tax regulation and monetary policy and fiscal policy stays, I think you'll continue to see strong M&A for the next 4 years. I do not believe that you'll see any significant public-to-public deals. I believe the two large national companies, Republic and Waste Management, have probably done their last public-to-public deals. I think you've seen the scrutiny that the advanced disposal deal has had with Waste Management, and we're now going on 15 months, and there's still not a consent decree for them to be able to close that transaction, and the divestitures are substantially greater than was originally contemplated. I think gives you an idea of the DOJ's tenor on the consolidation at the top of the waste industry. If Vice President Biden is elected, and again, depending on what happens in the House and the Senate, the reality is, and he enacts the policies he has talked about with tax increases, with the elimination of capital gains taxes above certain income levels, with dramatic increases in the corporate tax rate, you are going to see a dramatic deceleration of M&A. Dramatic deceleration in our industry and in most industries, in my opinion. And so it really does come down a lot to the geopolitics that happen at a national level, because those policies are either fuel or a retardant on M&A growth. Over the long term, I think you will continue to see M&A throughout the sector, both of public companies acquiring private and private companies acquiring private companies as well, and small and slow municipal government exiting the business, privatization efforts, if you will, but that moves very glacially, but I think you'll continue to see it. I do think that the two largest national companies have probably done their last significant public-to-public deals. I think it would be very difficult for them to do something different. Waste Connections has been an M&A machine for 23 years. Have had a booming last 4 years in M&A, and I don't think that is going to change. Obviously, as the company becomes larger, the M&A total as a percent is smaller, just mathematically. But we're still going to have a very active 2020, exceeding what we originally sort of guided as a year, where we're generally going to grow 3, 4, 5% plus through acquisition a year, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. The other big change, they're not predictions. I think they're self-evident. You're just going to continue to see automation and technology accelerate through the industry. You're going to see the evolution of electric trucks. You're going to see the evolution of more autonomous driving vehicles. And I don't mean without a driver, but I mean with lane control and other things such as we have in cars today, driver-assisted devices that are not really in heavy-duty trucks today will be very, very shortly. That will help accident and injury frequency of the sector. So I think you'll continue to see that. And I think you'll continue to see government regulation advancing and more continuity across the United States from where today it is more regionalized and even specific within the states. I think you're starting to see more national overlay for the sector.
Yeah. Well, very good. And so there we have it, more M&A for the next 4 years. And, Ron, when you guys look at a company, when you're just initially starting to send your feelers out and take a look at some of these companies that you acquire, can you tell us anything about what catches your eye, what you look for in companies you're attempting to acquire?
Sure. I mean, first off, we have a very what is a very clear strategy of what we're looking for and what we're not looking for. I mean, our strategy is we want to be in exclusive franchise markets, sort of in the 9 Western United States. If we're not in that, we want to be in suburban and rural markets with very high market shares, generally in an integrated landfill position. If we're going to be in an urban market, we want to have a very large share. We absolutely would mandate being vertically integrated. So first off, the acquisition target has to fit our strategic criteria from a market strata standpoint. What is the market? How does that market that target is in work? And then what is the asset positioning that that target has within that market? So if we can't get those two right and it doesn't meet those criteria, we don't even get to the third step, which is, of course, financial and economic valuation of the potential target. We look at things like, what is the capital that's been invested over the last 3 to 4 years? What's the capital that's going to be needed in the next 5 to 10 years? What's the depth of the management team? Is the management team desiring of staying or going? What's happening with ownership? Are they wanting to stay? Are they wanting to go? How is the pricing for the customers in the market relative to the competitors in the market? Valuing an acquisition and determining if a potential acquisition is right is really painting a picture on canvas. It's much more of an art than science. There is science about looking at the database and looking at the condition of the equipment and running financial models, but really determining whether that acquisition is going to work within your organization long term is far more of an art than a science.
Yeah, well, very good. Thank you for that. A couple more questions. We're getting a little short on time, but you mentioned automation, and I want to talk a little bit about safety. COVID aside, we're still the 5th most dangerous occupation, which saddens us all, and we do want to make progress on that. Personally, I think automation and technology, something in those categories will be the thing to ultimately save us. We still have problems with texting and driving, with all the other things that we had before COVID. Can you just talk a little bit about safety in the industry and your thoughts on that and where you see it going, and what can NWRA, what can anybody do to help? So
yeah. Well, first off, let me give you a couple interesting statistics that we track this very closely. We've got 11,000 plus vehicles on the road daily. So throughout 2019 and 2020, just north of 25% of incidents that our vehicles are involved in are another vehicle hitting us while we are moving or stationary. And 99% of the time, that is due to driver inattention, meaning passenger car driver inattention, texting and driving, talking and driving, something, or looking at GPS on a phone while driving. So we do not believe we're any different than the rest of the sector. So a quarter of all incidents that occur are actually the public hitting us. Okay. Right. Now, let me tell you what happened during COVID. From March to May, when there was more of a lockdown, a national lockdown for almost 60 days in some parts of the country, we saw incidents drop by over 35%. So it really reinforced to us that a very high percentage is because there were not people on the road to hit us, right, aggregate incidents dropped by that much. So, but the reality is automation can do a lot. Technology can do a lot, as I mentioned earlier. Driver-assisted technology is coming next. Lane control device technology in the truck, braking awareness technology in the truck, things that we have in automobile vehicles today will be getting very shortly and are getting in real time in heavy duty trucks. The other reality, though, is that there is still a portion of our industry at all levels that view accidents and injuries as a cost of doing business. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that that 72% of business of incidents within Waste Connections that aren't someone else hitting us, they are 99% preventable. And what that means is that there is some behavior that is either learned or repeated and not broken that is causing those incidents. And technology can help you identify the behavior, but coaching and dealing with the driver in training and training out that behavior is really the only way to address the behavior. There are many organizations today that are reticent to address driver behavior. They accept that the driver behavior is, quote, good and accidents happen. And until that mindset changes and accepts that, well, yes, something's going to happen, but how do we drive this as close to zero as possible? And a milestone no one will probably ever achieve. But how close can we actually get by incentivizing and changing driver behavior? That's really where companies of all sizes have to get to. And that is a change from the historical view of the industry. That is something we're very passionate about. I believe Waste Connections for several years now has had the lowest I rate or recordable incident rate in the sector per hours logged. And we focus very heavily on the behavior and what that behavior will lead to if it's not corrected.
Okay, well, great, and thank you for sharing that. And I, hope we continue to make progress. The NWRA certainly is trying to do everything it can do, and we appreciate all the support we get from you guys with our safety efforts as well. But during COVID and in general, Waste Connections has provided NWRA with a lot of support and volunteer help, as have many other companies relative to our advocacy programs here in Washington D.C. and throughout the nation. And again, thank you so much for your membership, and you're certainly a very valued member of NWRA. We have been over the past few years really increasing our advocacy efforts, and you can tell that from the staff members we have on board and from the ways that we're spending our money and spending our time. What can we do over the next few years to continue to help you guys in your business and to make the industry a stronger industry?
Well, I think you're doing it. I think what you pointed out. Look, the reality is that this industry is still a very, very fragmented industry with thousands of private players, large public players, and of course, thousands of municipal government players. So it's a very fragmented industry, and it's a very local industry. And the challenge when you have a fragmented and a very local industry is getting any unifying voice when we start speaking about our federal government and state governments and overarching legislation that affects the entire sector. And I think that's where the advocacy of the NWRA comes in, and because there's really no other voice for the sector as a whole that has the ability to overlay public and private ownership and municipal ownership. Obviously, SWANA does that on the municipal ownership side as well. But I think, look, in the areas of safety and calling out, and not just essential, but almost emergency services type status for sanitation employees, to where that helps bring more awareness to a sanitation vehicle being on the road, particularly when a quarter of all incidents involve somebody hitting a sanitation truck, often while stationary. In fact, over 60% of the time while stationary. I think recycling regulation and legislation and bringing awareness to the true cost of doing recycling, the lack of end markets that there are, the necessity to develop markets and potentially, producer responsibility, I think is a large one. The ongoing debate that happens on both inter and intrastate waste flow issues that come about from time to time as landfill crises burgeon in parts of the country. I mean, these are the things that NWRA has done, is doing, and can do in the future to give voice to the sector, to bring about a more cohesive measure or cohesive voice, to what is a fragmented industry and a very localized industry.
Yep. Well, we appreciate that, and thank you for the compliments, and we'll continue to try to do good work on behalf of the industry. Ron, thank you for being so open with us today. I know that people, love to learn about the leaders in the industry. They find it fascinating. You're a superhero in the industry, and people want to know, what you're thinking, and we appreciate you for being online with us today. And is there anything else you'd like to add before we log off here?
No, Darrell, I appreciate those kind words and hope to try to live up to them. And I just wish everybody tuning in the best as the country recovers from COVID and continues to hopefully open up safely in time. And I wish everybody the best.
Okay, well, thank you, sir. Have a good day.
You as well.